at the heart of every business transaction is a conversation. It all starts with a conversation, right?
The business will come to you and say, listen, I want my people to have communication skills. But communication skills is like a vast ocean. What are the type of communication skills based on the role that a person should possess at each level? And that's the employee value proposition that then comes into play, where you're matching it to say, how is it that you are relevant to what is it that we are doing?
Yeah, hi Tripti, and hello everyone who's watching this conversation today. Thank you so much, Tripti, for joining us in this series that we've designed in collaboration with Click India to focus on the role of effective communication skills in corporate success. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you as the first guest in this series. So before we get into the actual topic today, I thought it would be nice to know a little bit more about you and also your journey so far, and how did you end up in this absolutely fabulous and I think a very dynamic area of learning and development.
Thank you so much. Very, very happy to be here, Vikas. This is the first for me as well. So all the best to you, and I hope we are able to, have a conversation that kind of ignites young minds and, I would say tenured working professionals alike. Um, Very quickly, I think I can break down my career into three very clear, I would say, areas. I began with, something that was not such a great opportunity, but I think it has created industries out of what we see today. I started with my career with GE, GE Capital International Services, back in 2002, which was at that point in time called a BPO. It is now called Genpact, and it's a huge KPO that I think employs millions of people across the world. So when I talk about the three areas that my career has focused in, I started with the operations. I moved on to the role of being a team leader. I was blessed to have a fairly large and a fantastic team under me. And we got that going for a few years before we had a project ramp down. And fortunately, at a very early stage in my career, I got to interact with very senior leaders in the organization at that point in time, where I was working as a business analyst. It was a fairly new type of role. I remember that the leader that I worked with then, he mentioned that, to work with me, you'll have to be very thick skinned because that is what the role demands. And I think that was a blessing in disguise because I got a lot of understanding of strategy, operational excellence, leadership communication, leadership, thought processes, etc. And that and then by influence of that and a lot of, I would say, push from my HR leader at that time, I moved on to being coming into learning and development as well, because we were trying to solve a problem for the IT team at that point in time. And that's what kind of introduced me to L&D, and the introduction of saying that even in IT, there's beyond certifications that you can look at. And it's been a fantastic journey. It's completely dynamic, and I haven't looked back on the journey except for except with a lot of amazement, and just humbled to be here.
Wow, wow, fantastic. So, approximately 22 years of corporate experience behind you right now, right? And incidentally,
Yes,
I
I don't
started.
count on it.
Right,
I'm
right.
sorry.
Yeah. So, and it's so amazing that I also started my corporate journey with GE. So we have something in common over there. And around the same time, actually, I joined GE Consumer Finance in 2004. Um, so I think you were also with GE. And were you in Gurgaon?
Yes, I was in Gurgaon
Yeah,
in the 22A office.
yeah, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
right next to the
That's,
highway. So yeah.
yeah, that's where I spent a few months as well. So, right. And I still remember the kind of rigor that G inculcates around processes and Six Sigma. And it really, it's a fabulous starting point for anybody starting out their career, because it
It
really
is.
builds you up as a person who focuses on quality. So, and that's a
Yes,
lifelong asset. So very interesting.
absolutely.
So you started with process, you started with operations, and then you moved into business analyst, and then you got into learning and development, which is an area where you have now spent close to a decade, I believe, or maybe slightly
More
longer.
than a decade. Yeah, more than a decade now.
Yes, absolutely. So, so how do you? So when you look at your journey so far, um, so how do you find the comparison between learning and development, which is quote unquote sometimes looked at as a support function, versus being in the thick of it when you are in operations, right? And operations is what drives the business, right? So how do you compare these two experiences?
I think, because it's even in the roles that I've played in the past and how I think the businesses that I've worked with, I've hardly seen that L&D is somewhere in the background. I think I've been lucky enough to work with leaders who have been really invested in learning and development. So it's not like a back burner agenda. There is a talent conversation or there is an L&D conversation in terms of what is it that we can do to upskill the teams always, and that's, I think I've been blessed to have leaders that I've interacted with like that. But at the same time, I agree when you look at the entire industry, it does happen. And a lot of times there are conversations where we do hear business saying that, what's the relevance of L&D? I think what it pins down to, it comes down to in terms of the importance is how is it that you're adding relevance to the conversation, or how is it that you're adding relevance to the role. It's the same as, for example, a few years ago, people used to say that, what's the role of HR? But today I see that there are leaders who don't get into conversations without having an HR leader on the board as well, or as a part of the meeting as well. So
Right.
that kind of shows the difference in how things have evolved. But yes, I think it's all pegged to how is it that you're adding relevance to the conversation. How is it that I'm adding relevance to a conversation on strategy, for example? How is it that I'm, maybe if there's a reorg that's happening or a restructuring, how is it that I'm adding relevance to that conversation? Is what it all comes down to. I think from an overall perspective, what I would also say, so one is at an individual level, how is it that I add relevance? But at a larger, as an organization level, it will also be about how is it that I'm able to look at the processes and frameworks that support the entire play around upskilling, and then map it to very strong talent management practices that hold meaning to every individual in the organization, right? So while it is about how do I bring a strategic blend, it's also very strongly about what are the practices that we are able to establish as a talent management leader, as an L&D leader, as an HR leader, to really bring that context to the lives of everybody on a day-to-day basis. So it could be maybe establishing practices around it. It could be upskilling programs. It could be how is it that you're assessing individuals and engaging with them through talent management practices, all of that.
Absolutely. And I think it's very interesting that you bring in the key word, which is conversation, because I believe at the heart of every business transaction is a conversation. It all starts with a
Yes,
conversation, right? And
yes,
and the venture that I run, which is Qualiant Learning Services, I think that is the DNA of our team as well. That we always try to enable better conversations for our clients. Um, and there are, and the way I look at it, there are conversations happening on two levels. We always have an internal conversation going on within us. We always have a talk
yes,
within our mind. We are talking to ourselves, right? That this is what I want to be, or this is where I want to be, or this is how they should be doing it. And then at some point, we need to bring that out, express it effectively, in a
yes,
larger environment and conversation, and add value
yeah,
with our skills, with our competencies to any conversation that we are a part of. And I think,
absolutely.
like you shared, that a few years ago, it was difficult for HR to get a seat at the table. And then now there is no table without a seat for HR. And I think a similar phenomenon is going on now and will evolve in the next few years for learning and development as well. Because
Absolutely.
the way the corporate environment is going, the volatility that we have, the rate of change that we have, everyone needs to move very fast and learn new things. And how do you make
That's
learning
true.
more accessible? How do you make learning easier and more available to everyone without having a learning leader, right? So I think that's where the whole movement seems to be, and that is why initially I mentioned it's a fabulous area to be in right now. Very exciting
Yes,
to be in the L&D space right now, and the next few years are even going to be more exciting. So
true.
that's fantastic, and I think a lot depends on how L&D leaders bring together their conversation at the strategic decision making table, and and give the right voice to this aspect of business, without which future competitive success will be difficult for any organization,
Absolutely.
right?
But
So yeah, sure, go ahead.
just to pick on that, because I think a question that I often get asked, as a part of my conversations with people, or maybe when you meet a lot of colleagues from the industry, right? The question is that when you talk about L&D, how is it that you can embed L&D? And there's been a lot of conferences I've attended where they say, you embed L&D within the business function. I think from a structure perspective, that's all okay. It's really about where do you begin from, right? Which means really, do you begin your conversation keeping what the business priorities are in mind? Or do you do it irrespective of what the business priorities are going to be because you think you have an understanding? But if we flip it out to say, okay, I will begin with what the business's priorities are and then align my priorities to what the business wants to do, I think this question on relevance will just never appear in the first place.
Oh, absolutely, yes, and that's so true. And I think, despite that being so simple, a lot of leaders tend to overlook this, and they start their conversations with an L&D agenda by itself, right? Whereas it should
True.
always be the business agenda and how L&D can support that agenda, and also highlighting that without L&D, the agenda will not be as effective. The business agenda itself will suffer, because in the current times, everybody needs to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Without that, there is no progress. It's just
There is
things
no
are changing
progress.
so fast,
So well said.
right?
Absolutely.
Um, so that
Absolutely.
brings me to the topic of the day, which is that when we talk about conversation, then we just figured that everything is about conversation. It starts with a conversation inside, and then goes to conversations with leaders, with customers, with stakeholders, and colleagues, and team members. Um,
Hmm.
and conversations at the end of the day require a person to be an effective communicator. For having better
True.
conversations, you need better communication skills. So as an L&D leader, what is your view, when you design the learning agenda for your target audience? Where do you see communication skills or the ability to have more effective conversations, let's put it that way, make it more broad based? How do you see that in your agenda?
Um, I so okay. So I would like to break this down to, I think, how we approach our development plans, or how we approach how is it that you look at L&D strategy for any organization. In the experience I've had working in learning and development, Vikas, um, one is that it's important for us to understand that in an organization there are certain flagship programs that run, but then the more important ones are the programs that you have at transition points in people's careers. So a transition point, for example, for a person who's just joining the workforce, maybe the campus to corporate programs, which can be, of course, tagged as different names, but a campus to corporate program, for example, then the first time that you become an SME, the first time that you become a people leader or a manager or a supervisor, and then once you become a functional leader. What's important to realize, I think, and that's something that I think Peter Drucker said, that what got you here will not get you there. So, up to a certain point, yes, technical skills are important, but I think communication skills should be viewed as a fundamental competency that underpins any sort of collaboration, teamwork, leadership, or even just simply being able to get the job done, right? So, it's important that we analyze different roles in the organization, we identify specific communication skills that are required, and how I look at it, communication skills is one example that I use whenever I do a TNA to say that, the business will come to you and say, listen, I want my people to have communication skills. But communication skills is like a vast ocean. So it's important, I think, if I say if it's a fundamental competency to say or to look at the job roles that exist and say that what are the type of communication skills based on the role that a person should possess at each level. For example, the communication skills I would have expected from myself or leaders would have expected from me when I was starting my career to the kind of communication skills I will be expected to kind of exhibit now are vastly different. And that is because my time spent in the career has changed. That is because my interactions have changed. And that is because my role has changed. And now communication is not so much about having to convince. Communication is more about how is it that you're establishing a relationship where it's not so much about convincing, but about saying that this is a priority that we focus on, and you present a case and it's signed off. So I think it's very important to peg it on what is the role that the individual has at this point in time, and then identify what are maybe the basic, intermediate, advanced, expert, and leadership level communication skills required. I think, as an example, when you begin your career, communication skills are important in terms of interpersonal skills. So, how is it that I communicate what I need to intentionally? How is it that I communicate on email effectively? And how is it that I communicate to get work done? That may change too. How is it that I communicate to get results from my teams when I become a manager? And similarly, when you come into a leadership position, whether you're an individual contributor or even if you're driving a team forward, then your communication is about how is it that you're influencing, how is it that your day in day out conversations are contributing to creating your brand and your presence. And sometimes it's non-verbal communication as well, right? Which is, for example, saying that at a leadership level it's a lot about dressing for the role. It's a lot about how is it that people perceive you when they first see you. So I think incorporating all of this and defining it, really saying what is it that's expected of a person with respect to communication skills, becomes very, very important for any learning agenda to be successful.
Wow, amazing to see that clarity and the way, the structure that you've laid out for looking at communication skills from the L&D perspective. And honestly speaking, in the last about 10 odd years that I've been working with a lot of different organizations, supporting them on their communication skills training agenda, it is rare to see clarity of this nature, because a lot of organizations, unfortunately, even the bigger ones, tend to broad brush communication skills across different milestones in the career, right? So they tend to treat it as, one generic skill which can be applied anywhere, and is kind of transferable. And there is a lack of the micro level understanding that when you are at the beginning of your career, your communication tasks and the results expected are very different versus when you are at the mid management versus when you are leading a function or an organization, right? And like you very succinctly summarized it, that you might be having a very tactical level of communication when you are beginning your career. Even that is important, right? It's not that it's tactical, so it's not important. At that stage, that is equally important, but it needs to get more and more strategic in nature as you evolve and grow in the career and become either a people manager or a function leader.
Communication skills are not up to the mark is not what you need to do. It's about being able to identify what is really wrong. How is it that you're doing the problem analysis to say what is really wrong?
You're bringing in an analytical approach to pitching communication skill training. So rather than making it general, you start with the problem that this is the gap, this is what we are facing on the ground.